Hi everyone, I'm the Parabox, and in this video, we're going to look at the workflow I use to create mechanical characters using hard surface modeling techniques. I'm going to show you how I solve some of the typical problems of this technique, and how to interpret concept art to create this model, trying to preserve its identity and charisma when we bring it into 3D. This is the second model from a daily Blender modeling challenge that I'll be sharing here, and the video was recorded during a stream session. If you want to see the final file for this model, I'll also leave it down below in the description. And this time, unlike the previous model, we're going to work on a character with much more controlled geometry. For hard surface modeling, we focus on first creating the basic blocking of the model with very simple geometries and very clean topologies, since to give them the final finish and make the surface feel solid and rigid, we need to add subdivision modifiers. So as you can see in the time lapse, I'm using extremely simple shapes like cylinders and cones, to which I add a little bit of geometry according to the requirements, trying to define all the main pieces. Once I have these pieces defined with very little resolution, that's when I'm going to proceed to work on the surface details by adding modifiers. As you can see at the beginning, it's simply a matter of placing base objects and positioning them where each of the model's pieces goes. And that's the reason why I chose this concept, because even though it's a model made from extremely simple geometries, it has a lot of charisma and personality. So here we're really going to try to bring out the model's potential from that charisma it projects, which is something we're mainly going to generate with the pose, the materials, and the lighting. Because when we model characters, we're not simply basing ourselves on the geometry and volume of their construction, but also on the energy they project. In every phase of creating a character, we have the possibility of telling a little bit of their narrative background, and that's what really gives it artistic value. Not only that it's technically well made, but also that it can tell a story through its silhouette and details. This character, for example, despite being a rigid object, has many rounded elements and a very compact figure that makes us feel that it's a friendly character. So, trying to recognize these elements in the concept art and transfer them to the 3D model is perhaps the most important point for making our character truly attractive and stand out from the others. And that's also what really makes us stand out as artists. Well, let's look a little bit at the technical side now. At this point, for example, I've already added a wide variety of basic shapes, and I'm starting to add the subdivision surface modifier to some objects. I did it with the cylinders on the forearms, and now I'm doing it here on the character's boots. Once I have the basic silhouette, I add some support loops to define the edges that stand out on each object. And this is a very iterative process. Normally, I have the basic geometry and I add the support loops, and then I move the position of this basic geometry again, trying to refine the silhouette. Here I already have most of the objects. I added shades smooth to them so their surfaces look smooth, and I started adding the hard surface modifiers, which are mainly the subdivision modifier to add more geometry and smooth everything out. Also the bevel modifier to sharpen the edges, and sometimes the solidify modifier. Something that is extremely fundamental in hard surface modeling is that all objects have a bevel, even if it's very small, because the bevel makes objects feel much more real, since if we have our object with a completely sharp edge, it will feel artificial and lose a lot of credibility. If you look around you and observe hard objects, all the edges that exist on objects have at least a little bit of roundness. Well, here I'll take the opportunity to tell you that if you want to learn all these concepts, as well as many modeling techniques, I have a complete Blender modeling course for beginners, where we cover organic modeling techniques, hard surface modeling, modifiers, digital sculpting, materials, and a final project where we create a complete character from beginning to end. So if you want to learn Blender with solid foundations for modeling with confidence, I'll leave the link in the description. And well, getting back to our model, here's what I'm going to do. Since I already have all the pieces that make up my character, I'm going to put the reference image next to it and adjust the proportions accordingly. I highly recommend that when you're making a model from a concept, as in this case, you make the model while looking at the reference in order to train your eye and try to adjust the silhouette and proportions simply by comparing them with this reference. And when you feel that you already have all the pieces, then put the reference behind your model to verify whether the proportions and silhouette are correct, and from there, make the necessary corrections. I recommend doing this rather than using the base model behind it from the beginning, because this way will improve our observation skills, and this will help us make it increasingly easier to interpret the concept art of whatever we're going to model and transfer it into 3D. Well, getting back to my model, in this part, I'm simply adding more details and always trying to do it in the most optimal way possible. For example, there, for the joints, I extracted a cylinder from another cylinder that already existed. Doing this type of thing greatly speeds up our workflow. Now here for the eyes, what I'm doing is a Boolean operation. I'm going to leave it like this in a very rudimentary way, and later I'm going to finish polishing it. And to extract the metal plate that's on my character's chest, what I'm doing is extracting part of the geometry from the main volume of the body and adjusting the position of its vertices so that it resembles the plate I have in the reference. To speed up this process, something else I do is delete half of the object and then add the mirror modifier. This way, I only have to do things on one side. And now, to make this geometry cleaner quickly, what I do is use this add-on called Quad Remesher, which recalculates the geometry, leaving me with very clean topology. Unfortunately, this is a paid add-on that is a little expensive, but it has become fundamental to my workflow since I constantly need to perform remesh processes on my objects, both on organic objects and on hard surface objects. And to finish polishing this piece, as always, I add the bevel modifier and the subdivision surface modifier, and I finish making the details that this piece is missing. I'm also going to make the little hole we have here where the gumballs come out, and later I'll also make the crank. All of this is a very basic modeling process using vertices from very simple objects like cubes and always adding the modifiers I need so that it becomes hard surface. Well, I'm going to continue refining the head now, and this time, since I made this process with a Boolean operation, the topology isn't suitable for adding modifiers. So once again, I use the Quad Remesher add-on to help me extract much cleaner geometry. And now I can add the modifiers to this geometry. This piece is going to have the Solidify modifier. I'm going to make a bevel manually, and also, finally, the Subdivision Surface modifier. And I also decided to put a cylinder on the inside here, which I applied Shade Smooth to in order to create contrast with the eyes. I'm going now with the crank on the inside. I initially tried making it with a separate little cube, but then I decided to extract the geometry directly from the cylinder. And well, here we already have almost all the elements of this character. I'm now going to extract this metal part, which has the same shape as the glass container. So I simply separate a part of this sphere and add the same hard surface modifiers, the Solidify, the Bevel, and the Subdivision. And I do the same thing on the upper piece. Once I have the upper piece, I simply copy the modifiers from the bottom one so they have the same appearance. Now I'm going to continue with this container, and this piece is going to be transparent, but since it's going to have a glass material, I also need to give it some volume. I need to have volume in the model, so the material's refraction can be calculated properly. Here, I'm going to start posing my character, and since I don't want to add a rig, because I want this to be a quick process, what I do is parent several objects to the arm cylinder, and this way, when I move the cylinder, everything else will move with it. So by doing this, I'll be able to pose my character quickly without having to complicate things with a rig. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Since some pieces are mirrored, it's also important to apply this mirror and separate them manually. And I'll keep applying this same concept, for example, to the head. I parent all the glass and the pieces on top to the head object. And this way I can pose it quickly, simply by rotating and moving the object. Now let's continue with the fingers, which are an extremely basic model. It's simply a matter of taking a cube and adjusting it to the position we have in the reference. The character has to be holding a little ball, so I'm simply going to use a cube for each joint, and this model is going to have 2 joints per finger. So I'm simply going to duplicate these little cubes and position them as if the character were holding the ball. And once I have them more or less positioned, I'll also add the hard surface modifiers to them. Okay, once I have all the fingers with their respective modifiers, I'm going to add this other element, which is a little sphere, so it looks a little more integrated into the hand. And I duplicate the fingers for the other hand. And this is the point where we have to start thinking about what I was telling you about the character's charisma. Here, as we're making the pose, we have to start having a little bit of artistic sensitivity, trying to identify what the character is conveying to us. I feel that in the concept art, it feels a little more relaxed and friendlier. So, later on, I'll keep this in mind to try to give it a little more of that character. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the materials. For the materials, I'm going to start with a color blocking using the pointiness node. This node allows us to extract a little bit of detail from the curvature of the material, and that's going to make the edges look a little lighter. I use this curvature to generate a contrast between 2 colors, the primary color of the entire surface and a slightly lighter, worn-out color for the edges. And at the same time, I also start working on the lighting. First, I add an HDRI image to have some base lighting for my model, and I keep iterating a little more on the colors of the materials. I'm going to add a curved plane now, which I'm going to place underneath at the back of my model, and that's something that's very commonly done so the model feels integrated into the scene, so it doesn't feel like it's floating. And now, to give my material even more contrast, I'm going to make the edges look worn out and reveal the material underneath, which would be completely metallic. For that, I use a geometry node, I use the bevel node, and I mix them using a dot product. This can be a slightly technical process, but as you can see, it generates this worn out effect on the edges. And if you want to see exactly how this whole process is done, I'll leave my video here on how to create professional materials for hard surface models. Okay, great. Now let's continue with a fun part, which is putting the little balls inside the glass container. This seems easy, but initially during the stream, I tried several things and couldn't get it to work, so I had to do it after the live stream had already ended. This is done with a physics simulation, and there are many tutorials on YouTube explaining how to do it. Basically, it's simulating how the balls would fall in real life. So, once I finally had the little balls inside the container, I added a random material for different groups of balls so I could get the dynamism we have in the concept image. I did this using a random object info node, mixing it with a color ramp where I selected limited color groups. And again, once I had these colors, I ran the simulation again. And with this, we're practically on the final stretch of the character. I no longer need to build anything new, but rather get everything we've done to read well in the final image. Here it was just a matter of finishing up and polishing the material properties. I added a little bit of dirt using an ambient occlusion node, improved the lighting by adding a couple of lights, and also added a little bit of noise to the surface of the glass. And with this, here we have the final result. What's interesting to me is that even though the geometry is still quite simple, the pose, the materials, and the lighting make the character have much more personality than it did at the beginning. I hope you learned something from this video, and I invite you to subscribe because I'll be uploading many more processes like this. Remember that I have a complete Blender course for beginners that I'll leave in the description, and remember that you can also download the files for this model using the other link in the description. I hope you enjoy the process, and I'll see you in the next video.